Greetings and welcome to the Cerebral Women Art Talks podcast. I'm Phyllis Hollis, your host. As an extension of my Instagram page, Cerebral Women, this podcast offers insights into the visual art world. I interview artists, mainly artists of color and female artists who will freely articulate what inspires their creativity. In addition, you'll hear interesting perspectives from dedicated art professionals who work with artists and the art institutions that feature them. I'm confident that collectively, these individuals will indeed stimulate your mind as they do our eyes. Please know these interviews are conducted in my Manhattan apartment, so please forgive the background sounds of city life. Welcome to the Cerebral Women Art Talks podcast. In this episode, I interview photographer John Dowell. Earlier this year, I viewed his work during his solo exhibition at the Lawrence Miller Gallery in New York City. I had to intently study the images to grasp the stirring narrative hidden within the beautiful images of cotton growing in fields. His work educates and reminds many of the hardships cotton brought upon Black communities over the past 400 years. This includes communities within New York City. His photography is beautifully engaging, yet reveals the disturbing reality that Wall Street was once the site of a historic slave market, and that Seneca Village, a Black community that included dozens of homes, churches, and a school, was stolen and demolished to build Central Park. John Dowell's work, in a unique yet bewitching manner, reminds us of a dark past of our history that cannot and should not be erased. Thank you for joining my Cerebral Women Art Talks podcast, and enjoy John Dowell's narrative. Good morning, John, and welcome to my Cerebral Women Art Talks podcast. I appreciate you joining me this morning.
Thanks for inviting me.
Yes. And you're my first Zoom interview. So I hope my listeners understand that during this time of this virus that I'm now using a different tool. So the quality could be different, but at the end of the day, the mental stimulation that we provide will be the same. So I first really began to appreciate your work after I visited the opening you had in Manhattan, the Lawrence Miller Gallery. And I feel like I was fortunate because you were there to basically do a curated walkthrough of your exhibit. So it was very informative, very educational. So that's what inspired me to ask you to join the podcast. So before we dive into that body of work, share with us, when in your life did you realize that you enjoyed being a creative, and when you realized you are indeed an artist? So let's start there.
Well, that goes back early on. First of all, that I have an older brother named Lorenzo, and he's a year and a half older. And so whatever he did, I did when I was very young. So he copied comic books and cartoons, and so I did also. And around the fourth grade in school, one of the teachers said, we need somebody to make a backdrop. And I said, do you have a picture of a backdrop? Because then I could make one. So they did, and I made a very nice backdrop. And everybody patted me on my head and said, wonderful. And I became someone. And that was the beginning of the end, because I got patted on my head.
Was your brother jealous?
No, he just said, well, go ahead. Actually, by the time of sixth grade, he had stopped. And I was going to school art league, and it was I really enjoyed it. And it was my ticket out of the neighborhood, because I had to take a bus and two buses to get to the art school at 9th and Catherine. And up until that time, I was never out of my block except to go to school, which was just straight up the street.
Wow.
So it was my way out. But once I got to art school, I really liked it. I met a whole other group of people, and it was just wonderful for me. It's been that way ever since.
That's great. You taught for a while, right?
Oh, a while. I taught at Temple University for 42 years. I taught at Indiana State for 2 years. I taught at the University of Illinois, Champaign-Urbana for 3 years.
Fantastic. And your students, I know you focused and you taught mainly, was it printmaking?
Yes, that's correct.
Did you also want to help them in terms of realizing who they are, who they were, how they thought, and how to take that and express themselves in their art?
Yeah, well, there's two things. Very early on, my concern in teaching was teaching structure and not a style. So understanding about space and composition, and I did things early on by having a record player in those days in the classroom, and I would play John Coltrane or Archie Shepp or Philip Glass or John Cage, showing structure, ideas about how one puts an idea and a concept together. And so that became important. Then in 1975, I'm pretty sure I taught the first organized class in this country, the business of art for art students. And as a matter of fact, I have students who are teaching that same course, all over the country.
Wow.
From that.
Wow. That's great. Yeah, that's really important. So do you have memories of getting really absorbed into your work that led to your recent body of work that focuses on cotton? And I know back in 2018 at the African American Museum in Philadelphia, you had a show titled Cotton, the Soft, Dangerous Beauty of the Past. Share with us how, if you can connect intellectually, how you began to focus on cotton.
Well, it was sort of strange in that in 2011, in September, I had a show at the Telfair Museum in Savannah. And this is a show that was going to be showing my cityscapes. And at that time, about 3 months, I'm negotiating back and forth. You know how that is, how you going to get this, there, that, the framing and everything. I started having dreams about my grandmother. And after about the second or third dream, and I would have to say my grandmother had been dead for over 45 years.
That's spooky.
Yeah, and so I called, I had 4 living sisters and a brother. And so I started calling them saying, have any of you been dreaming about Big Mommy? And everybody says, no. So then I had a few more dreams. And then I called another sister, one of my sisters, and she said, I don't know what you're doing, but you're doing something. You better pay attention to Big Mommy because she did not play. And it's serious. So you better go back to sleep and figure out what she's talking about. And then, I started having memories of being very small and about 3, 4, and she's telling me stories and stuff. And, she wore these big house dresses, and she sits like on a chair, and you're standing up, with your arms around her as she sits. and she told stories about cotton. And I said, cotton, okay. That's what I was thinking. Then it was another dream, something like that. And so I said, you don't play with Big Mommy. I called a farm agent in Savannah and got the name of 3 farmers. And the first one was sort of shocked that I wanted to photograph cotton. But I said, well, I've just been in South Dakota and I photographed corn. And he said, live corn? I said, yes, live corn. And so I went to meet him and everything, and the other interesting thing was that he had a daughter who had just graduated from art school with a major in photography, which is to me is strange to find, a cotton grower, a white cotton grower in, near Savannah with a daughter, graduating from art school, So, but anyway, I went and it was a little nerve wracking going because I'm looking around. I'm driving 35 miles out of Savannah and I don't see any black people. Well, you're not seeing hardly anyone, tell you the truth. And so, but I got there and it was interesting. And he introduced me to his family. And of course, his daughter was there and she just wanted to see what I was going to do photographing cotton, which she'd been around all her life, which she had never thought about photographing it, even though she was a photography major. So he told me a lot of stuff and he's showing me things. And finally, she had to tell his dad, he's not a botanist, he's an artist. Let him shoot.
That's cute.
So at lunch, so they said, we'll give you a little lunch and, and you can go in this field and that field and this field and that field because they know you are here, which was very clear to me, And so, but in the course of the lunch, he said, this property has been in my family for over 7 generations.
Mm.
And that took me out because I felt my grandmother had taken me to a place where some of my ancestors had been. It was really clear to me. And I'm trying to hold it together. I'm not going to tell him that. I won't say that, So, but anyway, I went and photographed that afternoon. Then I came back the next day, and when I left that afternoon, I had to go to a Walmart and buy me some boots and some thicker pants because I had tripped a little bit and fallen, my clumsy self. And it was,
prickly.
Oh my God, yes, because I was in a field that was more or less getting close to being ready to be picked. It had been defoliaged already and was halfway through that stage, which means that the leaves are shriveling up and it's getting, and so when it's picked, the leaves are gone. Or they're brown, dark brown and stuff. And then the pods are beginning to open. When those pods open up, they're really sharp. You got to really know what you're doing to pull the cotton out without, injuring yourself.
Mm.
So, but anyway, so armed with my boots and stuff, I came back the next day, was shooting. And then in the afternoon, something came over me. I just felt my grandmother was all over me, and I just cried and cried.
Wow.
And even thinking of it now, it's still a very emotional thing, So, but anyway, so that's how it began. And I started photographing in cotton to just, in a way, I was documenting. It was beautiful. I mean, I had never seen cotton except in a book, And so, and I'm from the city. I don't know, I photographed some crops, but never like this. And so I wanted to capture showing how sharp or dangerous it was to deal with a certain way. So I shot detailed shots of pods opening, and I shot things in field and stuff. So it started this process of like having every time I went to photograph, because I did 3 days there, and then when I came back, I wanted to photograph some more cotton. I felt like I didn't understand it enough, and so I started going to Virginia to photograph, and then South Carolina to photograph. And I'll never forget one morning on my way, and this was in Virginia. I was going to a place, and I had an appointment and to go to a farmer's place, but I was meeting an agent because this is the South. I didn't kid myself. I mean, I would call a farm agent, and sometimes a farm agent would take me to a farmer's place, or I got information they knew I was coming, and somebody would meet me. So I'm driving, following directions. I come over this hill, and all of a sudden, and I know I'm going to have to take a left-hand turn. I come over this hill, and I see a field where I have 180-degree view of this field, and it's solid cotton.
Wow.
And I just flipped me out.
I
pulled the car over and stopped and said, oh my God, what would I have done if I had to face this at 5 o'clock in the morning all of my life with no hope of getting out or in? So that's what happened. I started going through these things where it became personal to me. Like, how would I respond to it? Would I run away? Would I have had the courage? Could I, what could I have done? So those kinds of things made me develop all kinds of images. And then then after that, I was doing some reading, of course, about finding out how at certain times the slaves were really driven hard to work, and they had overseers who were not very human at all, and sometimes slaves died in the field, and they wouldn't let them stop to deal with that. They had to keep picking. So then I started making images of spirits coming up out of a field, and I started building things together. My brain took over, and as I imagined things, I went from what was actually there and to taking what was actually there and reforming it and creating a sort of surrealistic imagined idea, of the past and what, a slave would see, in the sense that, of course, we figure when one is in terror, one can imagine things, you can do things, and then also you're very sensitive to things too, because a lot of us were born with what we call the veil over the eyes. So you had perception, you can see there was another sense you were there, and that kept a lot of us alive. So that's how it got started. And then, oh my God, then another day in New York, because I've also been photographing a lot in Harlem and in New York, we went by, my lady and I went by a historical society, and on the shelf there was a book called Slavery in New York City. I said, well, wait a minute. I've been risking my life going down south photographing cotton. You telling me there's slavery here? The woman said, oh, yeah. She says, yeah. I said, we had a show in 2005 and stuff. So well, I didn't know of that. And so I bought the book, and that's when I discovered Seneca Village and, Wall Street, at Pearl and Water Street, where it was the second largest slave market in the entire country, and then I discovered about Washington Square, that, we inherited Washington Square first. But we were, in around 1644, there was an Indian Wars going on. So they got 11 to 15 indentured servants of the West End Company was allowed to get property and to farm and stuff. And because it was a buffer zone between the Indians. So anyway.
Yeah. No. Thank you.
I didn't mean to get carried away with all of that.
No. You shared exactly what I wanted you to share. So the recent body of work you have images from Seneca Village, from the
Yes.
park, and also Wall Street.
Yes.
So can you just share with viewers, your
Okay.
position on
Well,
that? Yes.
yeah. Well, what happened was that I found out about Seneca Village. I read about it, and then the Central Park has tours, and I took a tour. And on the tour, they showed us where people had lived and stuff and things like that around roughly like 82nd Street to 86th Street from, from the drive going over to where the 7th Avenue would be.
Okay.
That's roughly. And it spilled out a little bit beyond those too, but that's where the major concentration was. And the first settler, the first one to purchase, was Andrew Williams in 1825. But then 2 or 3 days later, a number of people from the AME Church and a number of other people also purchased land because, it was difficult to get land from Black people and stuff, and they wanted to be away. So what happened was that it was very difficult being downtown and living as Blacks, very, horrible living conditions, and you weren't exactly treated with love, so they were running away. So what I did was that I got a copy, and they wouldn't sell me a map, so I told them to hold it up, and I photographed it, and I blew it up. And I found out the locations of where buildings were. So once I found out the location, I photographed that actual spot 2 years ago, 3 years ago. I photographed that spot. Then I superimposed an imaginary drawing or a form over where that spot was and tried to give indications that you were looking at a place, a current place, but also through the eyes of the past. So I used cotton as a symbol for Black people, and they didn't have photography in those days, and they did have photography, but they weren't photographing structures in Black sections and stuff. So I did a lot of research, and I ended up sort of developing a sort of surrealistic point of view about that spot. So and that's how I did, I photographed a number of different places and made images of them, but, superimposing cotton, a bunch of other things. So when the first time I showed it, people said, well, there was no cotton in Central Park. I know, but they were Black people. So I'm trying to make you think. That's all.
Yeah. Thanks for making us think. That's great. So I'm going to include links to your website so that people can see the work that you talked about. I also want to ask you about a quote that I see on your website. And I want to ask you, where you were, what intellectual space you were in at the time that you put these words together. So I'm going to read it. And the quote is, "Capture the spirit of the moment. All things may not be related, but they are connected."
Well, that comes, okay, we give the real background of it. I've photographed a lot. I got to photographing the cities because it deals with space and time. I shoot in a lot of evening photographs of vast spaces of buildings because people put lights on in the evening, and then when the lights are on, I can photograph and enter the space. Okay, that's where it starts. Then what happened is that, and also I have this feeling early on, I'm feeling when I'm photographing a city, and especially when I'm photographing certain blocks, I get the feeling like these buildings know a lot. There's history here. There's spirits here because somebody got shot there or somebody, fell in love with somebody there. There's a whole history we don't know to, but it's sort of known. It's a sense of an awareness of that. And so at one point, I was photographing a pretty wide area and a lot of windows and a lot of things, and but it was something like sort of like an outside in a way, and you could see people all over the place. And I'm saying, like, my God, all these people are are involved in their own lives, and they have nothing to do with each other, but they are. It's the same moment in time. It's the identical moment in time, but we're still carrying on our things. And so it just sort of struck me that, and I had never thought about it that way at first. So that's how it built and came along. I hope that explains that.
Yes, very well. Very well. And what body of work were you working on at the time? You said cityscapes?
Yeah, well, I've got quite a bit. You go on the website, you'll see a bunch of photographs, especially of New York, cityscapes of New York, and of Manhattan and of Harlem, where it's a lot of the times the shots are in the evening, and I have this thing about penetrating space. In fact, a lot of my friends at that time said they were getting curtains because they didn't know I was nearby. And so I'm at the point even now when I in New York, I ask somebody, meet someone, and say, "Well, where do you live? What floor do you live on? And do you have a view?" Because I'm always inquiring to go to photograph. I like photographing from above. But, yeah, I'll do 30 stories, but 20 is cool. 20. Between 10 and 20, I'm on it because I can then photograph a person, and the person has a presence. After that, it's too big. The person doesn't have a presence, and I want the viewer to sort of identify and also give a view that a lot of people don't see.
Right.
Many people don't see from that height. And or do they pay attention? Because I know some of these people who had the apartments I photographed from, they never looked out the window the way I look out the window,
No, your work is amazing. I appreciate it very much. So this is our last question. And, your work is very profound. It's educational, it's informational, and it's strong. It reaches back into history to some very sensitive times. And with that, what do you want your work to change? How do you hope it impacts the way people think, especially think about cotton?
Well, I would hope that it would bring about an awareness about where we have come from and not to forget it. I'll give an example. When 2011, when I first did the first photographs, and I printed some, and I had something hanging in my office, and a sophomore, a black sophomore male, walked in my office, and he said, "What's that?" I said, "Excuse me?" He said, "What's that?" I said, "That's cotton. Don't you recognize that?" He said, "No." He said, "Well, what's the big deal about cotton? Why are you photographing cotton?" And that just sort of took me out. And that really made me saying, I've got to do this project.
Mm-hmm.
I've got to do this project. Because I asked him, I said, "Your mother, no one's ever talked to you about cotton or anything?" He said, "No, what are you talking about?" I said, "You know about the history of this country and slavery?" And he said, "Yeah, well, sort of." And I just said, and so my idea is what I would like is I like it, and this has occurred a number of times where people see the work, they get interested, and they start doing their own research, and they start reflecting on how they respond to the idea of cotton and to our past. And that's if I can be a stimulus to make that happen, I'm really happy. But at the same time, I'm trying to teach them about light and color and space, and because I try to make powerful pictures. That's my job, and the fact that I can impart information at the same time is wonderful for me. But if it's a bad picture, I'll tear it up, even if the idea is good.
I said that was going to be my last question, but as you were talking, I thought of one more thing. So the gallerists that allow you to, that show your work, do you think they connect with how the impact you want to have? Do they understand that?
They do. I mean, Lawrence Miller did. I've known him for quite a while. I mean, sort of like peripherally for maybe about 5 years, he and his wife. And then I happened to go by the gallery maybe last November or October, and I said, Larry, I need to show you some stuff sometime. He said, yeah, okay, John. And so I gave him one of my cards, and one of my cards has had the Seneca photograph on it. That was on a Thursday. On Monday morning, he called me on the phone, and he said, you had that show in Philadelphia. Do you still have the work, the framed work? I said, yeah, I do. He said, well, we need to talk. He says, this sort of strikes me. There's something about this that's unbelievable. And then at one point, he visited my studio and saw the work. And, he really identified with it and about its being timing and the thing. But also, he was just struck about the beautiful work in the sense that how I approached it, so.
Yeah, it is beautiful. It is beautiful. Well, thank you, John. It's been great talking. And thank you for sharing your perspective and the history behind your work, and also opening up about your relationship with your grandmother. That's touching. It's touching. So thank you. Appreciate your time.
Thank you. All righty.
Okay. Take care.
Take care now.
Thank you for listening to Cerebral Women Art Talks podcast. For additional content, please visit cerebralwomen.com and be sure to follow Cerebral Women on Instagram.